Hello and welcome. This is a commentary on the Archbishop of Canterbury and his contribution as a member of the House of Lords over the immigration debate. When I've written in the past recently about the Archbishop, there have been one or two comments suggesting that perhaps I'm unfairly targeting him. He, with 25 other bishops, act in our legislature as Lords Spiritual. And so there's a case for suggesting that the privilege of Anglican clergy sitting in Parliament ought to be matched by a reticence to talk on political matters and speak only on ethical ones that spring out of the Church's unique Christian witness. So this is not a personal targeting, this is holding to political account. But the problem with this idea is there isn't much evidence that any of the bishops believe in the orthodox issues of Christian ethics and spirituality. They don't, for example, show any signs of believing in the sanctity of life, which is one of the most powerful and unique ethical insights that Christians have, which defend us from being brutalized by capitalism, socialism, or this renewal of paganism. The bishops in the House of Lords don't defend the preborn against the Holocaust of terminations. They don't speak about the coming terror of euthanasia that's going to sweep the vulnerable elderly away as an economic and medical burden on society. They don't speak about marriage as the place for guarding and building society through the family. A couple, a man and a woman, having children who then act as generational social glue with grandchildren and great-grandchildren. They don't protect our teenagers from the wicked sterilization program that mass gender dysphoria and the fear of growing into adults and becoming adults sexually in a culture steeped in the expectations of pornography imposes on them. In fact, quite the opposite. Justin Welby recently provided a preface of encouragement in a book promoting gender fluidity for primary school children. What was it that Jesus said about causing offence to the little ones? It won't have passed many of you by that these are all the ethics of the secular left. There's an assault on the Christian vision of the sanctity of the human person coming mainly from the left, which is something I increasingly want to talk about and warn about in the public space, unlike our bishops. And so when an archbishop adopts the political rhetoric of the left on other matters, including mass immigration, it can constitute a profound offence to Christians, who have grounds for seeing it as collaborating in the deliberate global de-Christianization of the West. Ask the Foreign Office, for example, how many Syrian Christian refugees they let into our country during the Syrian crisis. And the answer is that in a Syrian population in which Christians make up 10%, only 0.035% of the Syrian refugees who were Christian and allowed into the UK by the Home Office. Go figure, as the Americans say. It can constitute a profound offence too to any secularists who don't share the collectivist political ambitions of the left, to have Anglican bishops and archbishops give their voices to progressive political causes. So it's no wonder there are increasing calls to have them removed from the straight legislature. Let's ask ourselves then why it matters for Justin Welby to have accused the government of being unethical and immoral over immigration. Well, it matters because in so doing he not only risks impairing his office as Archbishop, which ought to worry Anglicans, but he also risks demeaning and distorting what Christianity is, which disturbs and threatens all Christians, including me. The body politic has no constitutional problems with giving Welby a platform to speak in the House of Lords. As you all know, the presence of Anglican bishops in the House of Lords was part of a political compromise intended to confer social and political stability at a particular juncture in our national story. Not everyone likes it, but it's accepted for what it is, as long as it's not abused. But they abuse it, often. And Welby's contributions cause a far wider problem for both Christian and secularists, in that failing to discern the litmus tests that Jesus put before his followers, the challenge of rendering unto Caesar that which is Caesar's, and to God that which is God's. Of course, the ambitious Caesar thinks that everything is his. We know that. But we also know that everything is actually God's. So what is the principle lying behind the words of Jesus here? It has something to do with not confusing different categories of values and priorities. Political means and ends are different from spiritual means and ends. All we know of history suggests that it's not an easy task, and it requires particular attention. And a place in the legislature is not achieved by any particular moral merit or political acumen by the bishops. It must therefore present a great temptation for them to express their personal political opinions. We all of us, each one of us, are possessed by a disproportionate sense of our own political maturity and insight. But if we were scrupulously honest, very few of us have always been right in our economic, social, and even our ethical judgments. We all learn and we change our minds over the years. And that alone ought to give us pause in our self-confidence, whatever platform we occupy, but particularly if we occupy one in the national legislature. So if you're a bishop or an archbishop, there's an even more challenging problem. In speaking from their episcopal office, they do present themselves in the public space as representing an authority on ethical and moral problems that their office confers on them. They speak, apparently, for an ancient wisdom tradition that offers authoritative insights into the complexities of the human condition. But what if they don't deliver any of that insight? It doesn't reflect well on us. And this is challenging enough for a Catholic who comes to moral issues with the benefit of the finely honed catechism and magisterium. But here, Anglicans are at a real disadvantage, for they have no magisterium in liberal Protestantism. The particular challenge that large-scale immigration poses is mainly expressed in the political and cultural dilemmas it poses. Those who flood into the country illegally, having paid large sums to accomplish it, are by definition not the weakest or the most vulnerable. An argument, in fact, can be made for saying that actually they're the most confident, the most adventurous, the most versatile and economically resourced of people, not victims at all. Entrepreneurs. Applying victimhood without any subtlety is not a compelling political or ethical argument, but it's one the bishops engage in. But the immigration crisis also comes with powerful political resonance. Like few other issues, it separates the right from the left. The left like neither borders nor the concept of nationality. They favour immigration without, as far as one can tell from asking them, any limits. A news outlet broadcast that they asked Mr. Welby what his proposed upper limit for immigration was, since he was so much in favour of it, and Lambeth Palace declined to provide one. The right, on the other hand, think that society flourishes better with borders and with a coherent national identity, with limits on the dilution that multiculturalism always and inevitably imposes. So how can a bishop pontificate about the migrant crisis without representing a political perspective? It would take extreme care and considerable caution and nuance. But that's not what Justin Welby offered his audience. And what are the pastoral consequences of relying on political rhetoric and politicised ethics? The answer is he alienates all those for whom he has pastoral charge, who might take a different ethical and political view to his. Perhaps they're centrists, or even on the right. In this case, for the Church of England, it's no small matter. The whole EU debate demonstrated that the senior clergy were almost universally on the left Remainers, and the majority of the laity were largely on the middle and right Brexiteers. The consequences of this are obvious. By taking the overtly political stance that he has done over immigration in this case, and claiming that it represents the only authentic Christian ethical position, he alienates the majority of those who rely on his pastoral office for their relationship with the Church. But there are two other reasons that should give him pause. Pause to think before speaking politically in the House of Lords. One of these reasons, equally important to a theologian, involves the interpretation of the biblical passage which St. Matthew describes in chapter 25, dealing with the sheep and the goats, so often used by Anglican bishops on this issue. The key to the interpretation of this passage involves discovering what Jesus means by his brethren in the phrase, insofar as you do it to the least of these my brethren or my brothers. Thomas Aquinas' Catena Aurea compiled patristic comments on the biblical text, and he shows us that the conclusion that most patristic commentators took on this text were that the poor, the wounded, the imprisoned, the hungry and the thirsty that Jesus refers to are the early Christian community suffering for their discipleship. That's why he says, if you do it for them, you do it to me. Jesus only ever uses the term brother, the least of these my brothers, about those who are committed to his vision of the kingdom and who follow him as an act of fidelity and devotion. And the Gospels are full of his warnings about the sufferings that Christians will experience and the cost to those who follow him of rejection, repudiation by the rest of society. If you exercise compassion towards those who suffer for following Jesus, you do indeed exercise compassion towards him. If this is the case, then the biblical text, so often relied on by the politically sensitized liberal Protestants, don't mean what they take them to mean. In losing sight of the significance of this key word, brethren, it's all too easy to turn this passage about the sheep and the goats into a universalistic statement of caring for anyone in trouble. However, Jesus does teach about caring for people in trouble, particularly in the parable of the Good Samaritan. And there we have the dominical teaching that using your own resources to care for those in trouble is an expression of the moral duty we have to love our neighbour, among the neighbour we live amongst. But as you can see, this is an act of personal responsibility, not an act of statecraft. The next problem the Archbishop's stance on immigration throws up is that it favours one set of ethical principles over another set. And this is the perennial challenge of always doing ethics. It makes it so difficult. It always involves weighing two or more different sets of ethical priorities and exercising a degree of discernment. That awful word, judgment. Who am I to judge? We have to judge, not only over the relative merits of each of the arguments, but also the outcomes, intended and otherwise, that makes that choice. We have to choose between two complicated sets of ethics. And it ought to be a matter of serious concern that we hear nothing at all from the Archbishop of Canterbury about the means of the other merits of the other side of the argument. If he were offering to arbitrate as a mature ethicist, weighing Christian principles across history, across politics, across a spectrum of consciences, well, we might be grateful for his intervention, but that's not what he's doing. But to be presented with only one side of ethical principles, set in the language and culture of one political perspective, promoting only one aspect of the Christian conference, and that, in fact, the least convincing, diminishes his claims to speak on behalf of the Gospels, the Church, and his office. He isn't, in fact, at all. So Justin Welby is not engaging seriously in an ethical examination of a matter that's going to alter the shape and the character of our country. And he's also bearing false witness against the government by claiming that the ethics lie on only one side of the argument, when they obviously don't. And this means he's mispresenting the faith of Christianity to a population of people who span both the left and the right of the spectrum in their own political outlook. Is this honourable? Is it honourable behaviour of a man tasked with one of the most responsible Christian offices that the Church and even that the state holds? Well, no, it isn't. It's dishonourable. Does it reflect well on the mission of Jesus to help make all people into believers and disciples? No, it doesn't. It brings the Church into disrepute. It makes it more difficult by mispresenting the faith as a political project instead of a project to save the souls of human beings, to help us be reconciled with God the Father in heaven, outside time and space. Has Justin Welby mistaken what the faith is and what his office is? Well, apparently he has. Should he continue to hold it? No, I don't think he should. In fact, he's also found himself very recently in the middle of a serious safeguarding scandal that's going to expose grievous mismanagement at the most senior levels in the Church of England, as the long-delayed Humphreys report has just been recently published. That's the subject of another and a different conversation we might have about the allegedly scandalous and irresponsible behaviour of both the former Archbishop of York, John Sentamu, and Justin Welby himself, who exercises the ultimate responsibility for the Church. John Sentamu has just been asked to withdraw from any active ministry in retirement after not only supposedly losing all his safeguarding records in a flood in his basement, but, in this case, not taking any action at all to protect the victims of safeguarding sexual abuse, insisting it was somebody else's fault. I doubt whether the fact that I think Justin Welby ought to resign his office as a matter of honour and incompetence in misleading the House of Lords will have much effect. But I do suspect that the charges of failing to act responsibly when the colleagues that he had immediate responsibility for failed may have more an effect in persuading him and other commentators that the office of Archbishop of Canterbury is not one he's qualified to exercise. May God have mercy upon him and all of us who seek to represent Jesus in the public sphere.